Hi, welcome back to the Dr. Akinde Breaks It Down video series. This is Dr. Akinde, and today's topic is influenza, the flu, and of course, how to prevent it. First of all, before we get started, I want to make sure that I ask everyone to like, share, and subscribe to the videos in the video series and to the channel in general. Even more importantly than that, I want to thank you for joining us. Just to make sure we grow the channel and get something going with this thing. This is a movement. Come to think of it now, there's a lot of information that's available out there that is probably not the best thing, especially medical information, because it's not easily understood. The purpose and the mission of this channel is to get information out there to people in a way that they can understand it, and then of course being able to understand it better, to be able to use it to make good decisions for themselves and their family. I'm a general pediatrician, therefore I have a perspective of a general pediatrician in the information that I'm providing. Of course, it's also important to remember that this is information, not advice about what you should do for your child or for yourself. The only reason I'm saying that is because I want you to make sure that you process information before making a decision, rather than just saying somebody told you to go do something. So here goes. Today, we're going to talk about influenza. Influenza is one of the most common diseases in the world. It's a viral infection, and it's caused by the influenza virus generally. There are many different strains and subtypes of influenza viruses, but generally around the world, it's one of the leading causes of illness and death, frankly. The reason that I'm making this video today is that the flu season is now upon us here in the United States. One of the important things to remember is that the flu or influenza is actually not a more severe cold as a lot of people think. They think just because they have a cold, if they have a fever with it, it must mean the flu. And vice versa, it doesn't mean that if you have a cold and it becomes a little bit more complicated than you usually have, then that means it's been bumped up to the flu. The flu and the cold have nothing to do with each other. They're both caused by viruses, but they're caused by different viruses and different types of viruses. And so they don't even really, they have nothing in terms of being related. So today, the important thing to remember is this. One of the best forms of prevention against the flu and influenza is to be vaccinated. That very statement in and of itself has become a very controversial topic, and that is really worrisome to me. The reason is this. While there might be people who are out there who believe that, vaccines, for example, can help with our health and immune system, there are many people who believe that vaccines may harm us and our immune systems. Either way, vaccines are not a belief system. Doesn't matter if you believe that they work or you believe that they don't work. Their effectiveness, their efficacy is in the data, is in the information, is in the science. So that's what I'd like to focus on. And I understand that given the nature of vaccines and such topics, people may decide then that they want to debate the issue. This isn't a channel for any such thing. I mean, we can certainly have a conversation. We can certainly bring up topics that we'd like to discuss. You can even ask questions. However, it's really difficult for me to give a platform to people who would say and do things that would endanger the lives of well-being, the safety of children. It's not going to happen. It's not a conversation that I'm going to have with someone to elevate them to the status of pretending as if they know what they're talking about when they demonstrate that they don't. Right? I mean, you wouldn't say, hey, Dr. AKINDE, why don't you take a look at the brakes on my car and debate the people who are experts in brakes, and then you can just state your opinion on it. My opinion doesn't matter. It's the people who do things for a living, who have a good measure of expertise in something, that can then provide you the best information. I think that makes sense. So that's really where I leave it. So, what's a flu and what's a cold? Influenza is a viral infection that is a constellation of many things, very often fever. It can involve nasal congestion, cough, runny nose, sore throat, headache. And it often involves not just those symptoms, but also a general feeling of fatigue and soreness, body aches. Essentially, it feels like you've been run over by a truck or a lorry, as they say in other parts of the world. While any of these symptoms can be present, not all the symptoms have to be present in order to have the influenza virus causing an infection in your body. The important thing is that testing is an important way of determining if you actually do have influenza. Sometimes the test itself is not normal or is falsely negative, though you may have the disease, or you may have an illness that's an influenza-like illness, but it's not necessarily influenza. So it's really important to make sure that you are gathering information, starting with your own symptoms, including fever, sore throat, headache, the feelings of fatigue, etc., and taking that to a healthcare provider who can then make the decision about whether or not testing should be done. If testing is considered important enough to be done, or if it's available, then testing should be added to the list of symptoms in addition to a physical exam, which would then all be put together, weighed, and used to determine whether or not a person has influenza. Influenza, if it's diagnosed, if the test is positive, or if there's a very high suspicion for influenza, especially during influenza season, then can be diagnosed and treated. There are several different anti-influenza medicines available. Here in the United States, one of the more common ones is oseltamivir or Tamiflu that we use. Generally within the first 2 or 3 days, within about the first 48 hours of symptom onset is when it's found to be most effective, and therefore is often prescribed within that time frame. It can be prescribed or used outside of that time frame, maybe even after 48 to 72 hours. If there's a high suspicion that the person is going to continue to be sick, or if they continue to be sick and aren't getting better, or even if they're hospitalized, for example, and it's just important enough to continue using the medicine to provide benefit for the person. During the course of treatment, we generally find that the medicine is pretty well tolerated. There are some potential side effects, however, one being nausea, another being like a sleepwalking kind of a phenomenon that's been reported recently. I reserve judgment on that sleepwalking diagnosis or side effect, because very often these things can be found in sporadic reports early, but then once the information has been re-examined, we find that it really didn't have any significance, and therefore isn't considered to be associated or cause-effect associated with the actual medicine that was given. So I'm still holding out to be proven that sleepwalking is a side effect of the medicine. And of course, any medicine that we use can cause allergies potentially, so we always want to make sure that we're considering that. And this isn't just, I had a little rumble in my stomach. I think very often people diagnose allergies too quickly, and so they call anything that they experience an allergy. And allergy is actually a really important thing to distinguish properly and to respect for what it is. It is a hypersensitivity reaction, an overreaction of the body's immune system to something that's usually well tolerated. You can think of peanuts, for example, as a food product that's usually well tolerated, but some people have such a reaction to it that they get inflammation in various parts of the body. And it includes potentially life-threatening airway problems. The same can happen with any medication. So it's important to just pay attention to the symptoms, to look for signs of problems, and to seek medical care immediately if that happens. So treatment generally, if the medicine Tamiflu is not available, or if not is not a good choice to use, then generally symptom management or symptom control is the important thing. That includes rest. That includes humidified air. A cool mist humidifier is generally what we recommend. That also includes using ibuprofen or Tylenol. Tylenol is known as paracetamol or APAP or QPAP or something like that in various places around the world. We generally reserve those two medicines in pediatrics as the ones that we recommend. Aspirin is a medicine, acetylsalicylic acid, that's available for the treatment of pain, fever, and inflammation, but that can be potentially dangerous, especially if given to somebody who has the flu. Aspirin is not to be given for anyone in the pediatric age range, less than 18 years of age, during times of influenza or times of varicella, chickenpox. There's a condition called Reye's syndrome, REYE' syndrome, that can happen. That can involve inflammation of the brain, inflammation of the liver, and it can potentially lead to death. So we always want to make sure that we know which medicines we're given during the times of flu. You can't just reach for grandma's aspirin and decide to give it to a kid just because you saw that it can reduce a fever. The medicines that we ask to use to keep a kid comfortable are ibuprofen or acetaminophen. So, that being said, the list of other supportive care things include fluids. So to make sure that the person is comfortable enough to actually drink fluids, they can drink cool fluids in order to help them to cool their body, because very often they have a fever, and then to feel more comfortable. It keeps a child especially better hydrated, and staying better hydrated leads to faster recovery and a lessened chance of the complication of dehydration. Very often in these videos you'll hear that dehydration it keeps popping up as a potential complication of so many illnesses, especially pediatrics. Their body size, their body surface area to weight ratio, and the nature of their inability to very often get a drink for themselves can lead kids to fall behind in their fluids and therefore be considered, and therefore more quickly progress to dehydration. So we always want to look for that. Signs of dehydration, of course, include dry, cracked lips, cotton mouth. Essentially just the saliva in the mouth is really dry and thick and concentrated. Sluggishness, sunken eyes, fewer or less frequent tears, and of course less frequent urine output. If all of these are present, then it's definitely time for evaluation and to be seen by a healthcare provider who can help you determine whether or not dehydration has actually set in and whether or not fluid administration should be given either orally or through the intravenous route. All said, that's what we want to prevent. We want to keep the kid comfortable. We want to reduce the fever. We want to provide fluids. And generally, within a few days, the person has recovered well enough. Sometimes there is vomiting, and if there's vomiting, you can still use the stomach to rehydrate someone during the course of vomiting, but you have to be really careful not to let them drink too much, because sometimes they vomit, they get thirsty, and they want to drink. And the idea is, when you're using the stomach to rehydrate somebody who's vomiting, to give them small, frequent sips of clear fluids, namely water or an electrolyte solution. If the person can eat anything, pretty much, then they should use water. But if they can't eat, they may need something with calories in it. And these electrolyte solutions really shouldn't be considered to be a substitute for their nutrition. They're probably only useful for 1 day, maybe 2. If you feel like you need to use any rehydration or electrolyte solution for more than 1 or 2 days, then you should seek the advice of a medical care professional to make sure that they help figure out what next to do. Sometimes hospitalization is the thing to do in order to properly administer the fluids and to take care of any side complications, which can then make things worse. So, for example, somebody has the flu and it progresses to an ear infection. The ear infection may be treated, therefore, or pneumonia, for example, that too may be treated, or asthma flare, that too can be treated in some ways. And all of that leads to improvement in overall physical symptoms and increased or decreased time to recovery, meaning getting better faster. So one of the important things, of course, is to make sure to get the flu vaccine. I haven't talked much about the flu vaccine, but the general idea is this. The vaccines are proven safe and effective. They're made anew every year because the flu virus itself is so tricky and evasive from the immune system. The flu virus is a virus that's an RNA virus that's known to mutate really readily. And by mutating, it then creates surface proteins that can more easily than other viruses evade the immune system, which then means the body's immune system has to work harder to try to find antibodies to these proteins on the virus, which are considered to be antigens. The body then has a harder time finding antibodies or making antibodies that match those antigens on the surface protein. This is the hard part about the flu. The viruses evade the immune system pretty readily, and the body takes time to catch up. We haven't been able to make a stable enough vaccine that can last or that can be considered reusable for years and years and years, or whose effect can last for years and years and years, to reduce the chances of catching the flu over and over and over again. That's why we have to make new vaccines every year. The way the vaccines are made essentially is that in the West, in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere, in Canada, and maybe even in Europe, there's surveillance of flu patterns moving from east to west. And therefore, scientists are following and watching how prevalent certain virus strains are in people who are diagnosed with the disease. And once they're found, the 4 most likely ones, or the 4 most potentially deadly or morbid, if you will, morbidity is the prevalence of illness or disease in a population. The ones that cause the most problems essentially would be put into the vaccine. Those vaccines would then be made in preparation for the flu season, which generally in the United States is from October to April of any year across the new year. So late in one year, early in the next year. Given that the vaccine is made every year, we ask everyone to get a new dose every year in order to make sure that we're prepared for the flu season. I've heard different things from different people recently, including that people say that they want to wait until just before the flu season to get their flu vaccine, or that it only lasts a short period of time, so they'd rather get it later during the flu season. That's actually not true. When we give the vaccine lasts through the entire flu season. As a matter of fact, the antibodies that you make as a result of that vaccine can last you forever. But the problem is that flu strain won't necessarily be the strain causing disease next year. Therefore, you have to get a new one next year, because that new flu strain or flu concoction of antigens, it can cause new problems if a new strain or 2 or 3 or 4 are part of the disease virus complex, if you will. So every year we have to know which viruses are causing, which strains of viruses are causing the disease in order to know what to make, and therefore to try to reduce the chances of getting the disease. And then you might also think and say, okay, so they put 4 strains in the vaccine, 4 antigen strains into the vaccine, but there are dozens and dozens of flu strains floating around. So if you only put 4 out of dozens, then what effectiveness is there? This is another way for people who very often kind of want to confuse the population to throw some of this misinformation out there that prevents people from having confidence in the effectiveness of the flu vaccine. When these strains are the most likely ones to cause the disease, think about it this way. You have a town of 100 men. 4 of them are bank robbers. So those 4 bank robbers are going to be the ones that are causing all the bank robberies. It's not all the men who are necessarily causing all the bank robberies. So you might say 4, maybe 2 more might do 1 or 2 or something, but those 4 are the most likely ones to be the ones to cause the bank robberies. So you don't say each man causes 1% of the bank robberies, but those 4 might cause 50%, 90% of the bank robberies, and therefore you want to make sure that you're focusing on those ones that are more likely to cause the problems. That's the way we make these vaccines. And so the ones that are put in there are done for a reason. It's not a random guess. None of this is a guess. It's not an educated guess. And so again, sometimes I do hear that people use that word, and it's really troubling because it erodes the confidence in the science that goes into making these vaccines, and that can potentially harm somebody's baby. It's really difficult for me to get on board with people who just kind of shrug their shoulders and decide that it's okay to just throw information or misinformation out there that can potentially harm somebody's child. That's the goal. Children less than 6 months of age are not eligible for the flu vaccine. Therefore, everyone else with a functioning immune system, have to be the one to get the vaccine, to cocoon them in protection, to protect them because they can't get it themselves. And then, of course, there are other people who would be very susceptible to getting the flu. People without an adequate or people without a functioning immune system. People with cardiopulmonary disease, and people whose hearts have to work harder whenever they get colds or pneumonias or anything like that. People with lung disease, like asthmatics, for example, who can really, really be negatively affected by getting influenza. If it were your child who had any of these diseases, you'd want everybody around them, anybody getting close to them, to be protected, right? So think of everybody else's child as your child. Use that as the reason to get the flu vaccine. Please get the seasonal flu vaccine in order to make sure, or at least talk to your healthcare professional about it, and not your coworker, and not the mailman or mailwoman, not anyone else that isn't known to be a medical healthcare provider. And by saying that, I also mean, please exclude those who claim to be doctors, physicians, and medical providers who would then undermine the public's health, right? So if a doctor claims not to so-called believe in vaccines, or tries to tell you that vaccines are somehow bad, I think you should run away really, really quickly. And it's not that any vaccine shouldn't be discussed. There's information out there. You can ask questions. I readily ask people and invite people to ask me questions so that we can talk about the problems in the topic. But once somebody starts telling you not to get vaccines, I think it's a red flag to be really, really, really careful about how much of whatever they say you listen to. It's like a canary in a coal mine. It just kind of tells you something about their either callousness to disease, callousness to the suffering of children, and the infirmed, the sick, the vulnerable, and their desire to often plug in whatever it is that they don't want you to do with something else that they're offering you. All I'm asking is that you just please protect yourself and you protect your families by everybody contributing as much as we can with our own immune systems to the herd, to the community's strength. It actually helps everybody. So if the flu vaccine, for example, for a season is said to be, it's only 65% effective or something like that, that might be the case. However, if everybody who can, that means everybody who's not allergic, if everybody who can gets the flu vaccine, we dramatically reduce the burden of disease in the entire community. A vaccine does not need to be 100% effective in order for us to use it, to take it. I mean, did you have to know everything 100% before you passed the test or moved on to the next grade in school? Come on. I mean, this all or nothing, it's not 100% effective, therefore I'm not getting it. It's really dangerous. It's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for your children. It's dangerous for everybody else's children. It's dangerous for the vulnerable children, which is why it's really important for us all to do our parts to get vaccinated and to get checked and treated in case of influenza. All right, so it looks like we've set a new record in terms of time spent on a video. So let's bring it back from the depths of discussion of influenza. Today's T-shirt is brought to you by the Nigeria Football Association. This is the 2016, 18, I'm not sure. Nigeria soccer jersey, World Cup, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, find it on Amazon. Anything else, talk to your healthcare provider and make sure that you're seeking information and care from somebody who actually practices medicine. It's important. It's important for your child. It's important for your family. It's important for all of us. All right. So I thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to provide any kind of feedback that you are willing. Like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you on the next video. Keep yourself well.